Welcome to the Social Media Masterclass. My name's Alicia Hancock and I'm the Director of Hancock Creative. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through a range of different tips and information about how to create social media effectively for your not-for-profit or cause organisation. Now, you're in the right place if you're someone who's maybe dabbled a little bit with social media and experimenting in this space, but you're not entirely sure how to get a clear, measurable return at what you're trying to do. You might also be in the right space if you haven't even started social media yet, but you know it's a huge opportunity for your organisation and you want to explore it in a lot more detail. What I'm going to take you through in this class is a key 7 steps to creating effective social media. So the first step is always about understanding your platform. You need to know if you're on the right social media channel for your audience before you start building a social media strategy. The second step is about understanding your audience. You need to know exactly who you're trying to talk to before you start creating a lot of content in the space. If you're not 100% clear on your audience, it's really easy to start losing your engagement and not reaching anyone because your message is too broad. Number 3 is about telling your story. So we're going to really delve into what is a story and how to tell it really effectively for your organization on social media. Tip number 4 is about being social. Now, it sounds ironic, but it is social media, yet so many of us go onto those platforms and just talk at people instead of actually engaging them socially in a conversation. Number 5 is about planning for the worst. As much as social media, particularly in the cause space, is not as risky as people think it can be, it's really important that you have those plans in place for something that could possibly go wrong, knowing exactly how you're going to deal with it and how you're going to solve that challenge. Number 6 that I'm going to go into is knowing what works. So we're going to delve some more into some of the tips around social media and what you can do, some really simple things to get more engagement and reach from your social media channels. The final tip is going to be about measuring your results and making sure you're getting a really clear ROI. You can spend a lot of time on social media, but if you're not getting the results, you'll actually really struggle to measure what the impact is of the time and perhaps money that you're putting into your channels. So one of the important things to know when it comes to social media is really understanding what is possible for a not-for-profit or cause. Now, most causes have the same kind of challenges. They're low on resources. You maybe don't have a big marketing team and lots of people to devote hundreds of hours to creating social media content. You also most likely have a fairly limited budget. So you guys really want to make the most of what you've got. So it's really important to understand some of the ways you can use your social media. And I would like to do that by sharing a couple of stories with you of people we've worked with. So one example would be we worked with Lifeline here in WA. And they had some challenges around some of their fundraising campaigns they were doing online. They actually had a campaign called Lights by Lifeline in which they raised around $3,000. The following year, we actually got them to turn that into a social media campaign. So in fact, they actually did it in 30 days instead of 12 weeks, which was their previous campaign. We got them to create some videos, which had a huge amount of reach. They only spent $25 on Facebook advertising to push it out there. But that campaign reached 600,000 people in a month. Now, the flow-on effect from that was quite huge. Not only did it increase the number of people that were calling them and asking for help, it also increased the number of volunteer requests they were getting. But best of all, it also helped them raise $12,000 in 30 days. So that's one small example of a little social media campaign and what's possible. And they weren't an organisation that had a huge following. So even if you're starting from a low base or you're just getting started on social media, it doesn't actually matter. Now, one of the most important things about creating social media is that you really think about what your strategy is going to be. So many people tell us that their social media is ad hoc. They come into the office on the day and they go, oh, I've got 10 minutes, what can I post today? And while that's okay, it's not going to get you those measurable returns like dollars raised and volunteers attracted if you don't have a clear strategy. So a social media strategy usually comes into about 5 clear components. The first one is about storytelling. So you really need to get clear, first of all, about how you're going to tell your story. What is your organization's story? What's that clear sort of 30-second elevator pitch? What's the heart of what you do? From there, you need to spread that out to, how do I choose the right platform to tell that story? Who am I going to tell the story to? How's our voice going to sound? What kind of content are we creating and how often? So that's generally the first part of the storytelling map of your strategy. From there, you really need to look at how you're going to attract new followers, because that's a big part of what you need to do. Now you've got your story and you're telling this great stuff out there and you've got great content. How are you going to attract new followers? Unfortunately, the old saying, if you build it, they will come, is no longer true for social media. You need to have an active strategy about how you're going to build a following, whether that's going to be promoting online or offline, using advertising like Facebook ad tools, whether you're going to do it through free methods like competitions. There's a lot of different ways how you can attract a new following. From there, it's about how do you actually make it happen. So you need to have specific tools, technologies, and strategies to get you there. So you need to think about your resources. I often get asked by people, how often should I post on social media, and how, should we do it 3 times a day or 3 times a week or 3 times a month? There's no right or wrong. It's really important that you assess the resources that your organization has. So if you have limited resources and only someone a few days a week, that is totally okay. You can build a consistent strategy around posting, maybe 3 or 4 times a week by using a scheduling tool or a piece of technology, like for example, Hootsuite. If you have a lot more resources, then you can start being a little bit more advanced, a little bit more tricky with what you're doing. But it's important you start first by understanding your resources. As well as people resources, you also need to think about resources in terms of materials. Do you have access to video? Do you have access to some great photos from past events or campaigns you might have done? What other content is there in your organization that you could use? Do you have annual reports? Do you have education materials? What can you actually access to do that? So that's what we talk about when we talk about making it happen. From there, it's about actually understanding how to maximize the opportunity. So once you've grown a following, how are you going to maximize the engagement and the conversation that you're having with that community? And on the flip side, how are you going to manage any potential risk that might come out of that? Because unfortunately, the reality is in social media is that there is always an element of risk when you build a big audience. So for example, if you work in the disability space, is there potential for people to post on your page to criticize you or say something offensive about the people that you help in your market? If you work for refugees, do you have to plan for how somebody might, fire up if there's something in the media about something that's happened in that sort of space, and how are you going to respond to that in a calm, measured, and quite rapid way? From there, the most important thing that you need is a roadmap. So what I mean by that is actually having a strategy plan that's written down and concrete in some way. So many organizations go, oh, we've got our strategy, it's all up here in my head. Unfortunately, the challenge we see with that in the not-for-profit space, it's great you might have a marketing manager or a digital strategist who has it all in their head, but what's going to happen to your organization if that person then leaves and moves on? You might only have 2 to 4 weeks to get that out of their head and into some format where you can train someone new. So I really recommend you spend time writing down as many of your processes, how-tos, resources, storytelling, all these different elements as you can throughout the year. So the idea is you have a guide or a physical book or a digital book you can give someone that outlines exactly what your social media strategy is going to be. So what I'm going to do now for you is take you through my 7 top tips for social media. So these are the things we've learned over the last 3 or 4 years of working with not-for-profits. The 7 most common things that we know you can implement in your organization to get really clear and measurable results. And the first one is really about understanding your platforms. Now, it can get tricky when you're not working with social media all day, every day, in knowing which of the social media platforms are going to be right for you. So I want to walk you through what the options are and how some of them can be similar, different, and how we choose the right one for your organization. So the first thing that's going to come up on your screen is something called the social media wheel. So this social media wheel actually shows you exactly how big the social media space is. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of social media platforms you could be using. The reality is though, you're always better not to spread yourself too thin. If resources and budget are limited, you're far better off doing 1 or 2 platforms really, really well than trying to have a presence on every single social media platform. And that's why it's so important to understand which are the right ones for you. And now I'm going to talk you through a little bit of an overview of the most common platforms you might be using and some data around them, and specifically when I would choose one over the other. So the first one that most people know about would be Facebook. So Facebook by far has the biggest usage. I'm going to quote a few stats here that come from the 2017 Census Social Media Report. Well worth having a Google and reading some more of the data around that report. But Facebook, we know, has 94% of people who identify themselves as a social media user in Australia. So 94% of all social media users are currently active on Facebook. From there, Instagram is the next biggest. So Instagram has 46% of all of the social media users in Australia. Now this is national data as well, rather than state-based, which I will talk you through in a minute. From there, it's Snapchat is the next biggest at 40%, and that often surprises people. Most people assume it's kind of Facebook and then Twitter, but it's actually Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat before we even look at Twitter. Twitter has 32%, LinkedIn has 18%, and then you start dropping to things like Pinterest at only 10% of the social media users. So you can see there's a big gap there in terms of audience size. Now, one of the things a lot of people tell me is that Facebook is dying. In reality, Facebook has stayed pretty consistent. They've had a few drops and a few increases, but in terms of the other platform, it's been very consistent. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize is they're actually still attracting new users at a really fast rate. And most of those are actually coming from the 50+ audience. If you look at the other platforms, LinkedIn has gone up and down a little bit. Instagram's had a steady increase. A lot of people don't realize that Instagram was actually bought out by Facebook. Twitter's been a bit up and down and had a bit of growth in the last year. And Snapchat's only recently joined into that platform, but it is still by far the fastest growing platform on social media we've seen over the last few years. Now, what I want to show you on the screen now is a bit of a slide that takes you through, again, some data from that census report, but shows you what that platforms look like state by state. It's really important for you to understand this because if you're based in New South Wales versus South Australia versus Perth, Western Australia, your reach and your audience numbers do get a little bit different. So let's just have a look at a couple of those to highlight. So for example, if you're looking at Facebook, 92% in New South Wales versus say 100% usage in Northern Territory or 97% in Tasmania. LinkedIn also has a bit of a jump between states. So where the higher states are definitely Queensland, whereas some states like Tasmania are as low as only 5% usage. So if LinkedIn was a big part of your strategy and you're based in Tasmania, I would say you may want to consider whether that is the right place for you. Instagram gets even more interesting. Some states like Tasmania, Northern Territory, WA and ACT are 50% or higher, whereas some other states in Australia on the East Coast, they're around 41 to 45%. So it's really important for you to understand that usage because what's right for one state isn't the same as another. So make sure you understand your state, and obviously if you're a national-based organisation, you're going to be looking at different statistics again. Now let's talk a little bit more about each of the platforms in a little bit more detail. I'm really just going to focus on the big, 3 to 5 platforms because there are so many and we just don't have time to go into them all in enough detail in this session. So Facebook statistically has 15 million Australian active users. So active users are people who are using Facebook on a monthly basis. If you don't log in for a month, you're no longer counted on the active user list. Now, the big advantage of Facebook is almost the same as its big weakness, which is the size of the audience. So the size of the audience means chances are the people you're trying to speak to are going to be present on Facebook and you're going to be able to find them there. Facebook's targeting is incredibly powerful. Now, Facebook knows more than 1 million points of data on every single user. So chances are Facebook knows more about you than your best friend, than your mum, and certainly more than your husband or your kids. But what Facebook has as the opposite challenge is because there are so many people using it, every user is creating content. So what that means is it's really easy to get lost in the noise of the content being created. Facebook's had to create these special algorithms that tell it when content is high value to an audience versus low value. And that's why sometimes you'll see things in your feed that are 3 days old from a particular company or a person, and somebody else might post that day and you don't see it. Facebook has to create that algorithm to determine the value of each piece of content, so you get a highly curated, interesting news feed. Downside of that, over the last couple of years, organic reach, which means unpaid without advertising behind it, has really dropped. So if you don't have any social media presence right now and you want to start on Facebook, but you have $0 to spend on marketing, I would probably consider going to a different platform because it is really difficult to get engagement and reach on Facebook now without spending money. The advantage is it's actually the cheapest form of advertising in the world today. There is no other platform or no other medium that you could reach people for $10 or $20 or $50. You can't buy TV ads, you can't buy press ads, there's nothing you can buy for that, but you can buy highly targeted, effective Facebook ads for a really tiny budget. So let's move on to our next platform, which is Instagram. So Instagram has 9 million Australian active users right now, and as I mentioned, owned by Facebook. So the primary point of difference here with Instagram, it's an image and video based platform. So mainly images with some very short video as well. Now, one of the strengths and challenges around this platform for not-for-profits is you don't always have a lot of really slick, amazing, beautiful photos to use. And there is a culture around Instagram of creating something that's Instagram perfect. It's the holiday you wish you were on, the lunch you wish you were eating, or maybe even the abs you wish you had, is what we're seeing a lot on Instagram. So there is a certain element of needing to be a little bit more of a better quality photo. Great if you're a not-for-profit that has adorable puppies or, you know, children or something that's very photogenic, but a bit more of a challenge for people who perhaps are in the disability services space or aged care or somewhere that they might struggle to find the same level of imagery. Or even if you're an organisation where privacy is really important for your patients or members or people you work with. So it's one of the challenges around that space. The advantages of Instagram, it's still quite easy to build an organic following or unpaid following. I'd say there's another 6 months to 12 months where we'll be able to continue doing that in a really effective way. So you can grow followings just by using hashtags, joining trending topics and things like that. All right, moving on to LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has around 4.5 million active users in Australia. So there are two main audiences you can reach on LinkedIn. The first is your white-collar professionals. So it's the best platform if you're trying to talk to board members, CEOs, people in that executive kind of space. It's also a great platform for number two, which is students. They're obviously hanging out on LinkedIn because they want to get a job. So they're really two great audiences. So LinkedIn's really effective if you want to look for potential donors or corporate partners or people with corporate giving programs or corporate volunteer programs. It's a really great platform to use because those white collar executives often aren't engaging on Facebook. They're probably much more active on your LinkedIn platform. The next biggest audience would definitely be Snapchat at 4 million active Australian users. Now this has by far been the fastest growing platform here in Australia over the last few years. But the cool trick with it is very few not-for-profits are using it. So what that means is, unlike Facebook that has 98% of our audience, Snapchat has a huge following, but there are very few brands, causes, charities or not-for-profits doing it really well yet. So there's a huge opportunity for you there, particularly if you're trying to engage with a younger audience. So we know, for example, that Snapchat tends to go for more your sort of 16 to sort of 30 tends to be the audience. So if you're trying to get to uni students or younger people, Snapchat is definitely the platform you want to explore. The other great thing, even though it's an image platform that on the surface is very similar to Instagram, Snapchat is very much evolved as raw and real. You know, the people I follow on those channels, the entrepreneurs, they're walking down the street with their phone in front of them, they're going to a meeting and it's wobbly and they've got earphones in their ears, but I still follow them because it's raw, it's real, I get to know what's going on behind the scenes in their life. Whereas Insta Stories is countering this a bit, but Instagram's a little bit more polished and perfect, whereas Snapchat's a bit more raw and real. And it's certainly got that element of exclusivity in that the content disappears after a day or so. So you have to be logging on really frequently to make sure you're keeping across what's going on that platform. From there we go to Twitter at 3 million Australian active users. Now, one of the big challenges with Twitter for most not-for-profits is it is a fast-paced platform. Now, it's very much about two-way conversation. So the challenge with that is you need to be someone who's monitoring it every day, and anytime someone tags you or messages you, you're responding really quickly to those conversations. A lot of causes really struggle with that speed because perhaps you work part-time or you just don't have the time to be going back and forth so quickly. So if time is a big issue, Twitter is a bit of a challenging one for you, and it'd also be identifying whether your ideal audience is actually hanging out and spending time on that platform, because perhaps they're not. The big strength of Twitter is the topic aggregation through hashtags. So hashtag Donald Trump, for example. We can see what anyone anywhere in the world is saying on that particular day about Donald Trump, whether that be good or not so good. Same thing if you're working for cystic fibrosis, you can be monitoring that hashtag and jumping in and engaging and giving value to people that are already talking about your subject matter. So going on to tip 2 is about knowing your audience. So we were just talking about the social media platforms and which one might be right for your organization. One of the best ways to tell that is really understanding your audience. Now, one of the big challenges we get in this space is a lot of people in the not-for-profit space want to speak to everyone. So very few of you are probably saying right now, oh, we wouldn't want a donation if it came from an 18-year-old or an 80-year-old. That's fine that you might accept those, but you're still going to have an ideal audience. You're still going to have someone that's an ideal volunteer or an ideal donor. Perhaps in your organization, an ideal donor might be someone who's, a mum themselves who are going to resonate with your children-based cause. Perhaps they've got a higher socioeconomic status, they live in a certain area, and they're actually going to become a long-term donor. So they're not just going to donate once off because they've seen an emotive story, they're going to become a regular contributor. So that might be someone you profile as someone, if you got a lot more of those, it would have a bigger impact in your organization than if you had a couple more 18-year-olds or a couple more of the 80-year-olds. So it's about understanding exactly who you want to talk to. Now, just showing on the screen a picture of a lot of different types of faces. Now, I like to show this to people just to illustrate the point that everybody is different on social, and the problem you're going to have is if you're trying, say you're on Facebook and you're trying to talk to everybody, keep your messages really broad so you don't offend anyone and you can attract the widest possible audience into your social media. I hate to say it, but the honest truth is you will attract and engage nobody. You really need to own a particular audience on each of your social media platforms. You need to know that you're talking to mums between the age of 30 or 40 who work part-time, who live in a certain suburb, who have certain challenges or issues or problems, because then you can talk specifically to them and about them. If I see a post that's very generic and broad, I'm likely going to do nothing about that, let alone even click like, let alone take action of volunteering or donating. But if I see content from you that really seems to speak directly to my heart, that goes, you're a mum with a young child, and this could be you in this situation where your child has a heart disease or cancer, or maybe even is just struggling at school, whatever message it might be, I'm far more likely to engage with that because I know that you get me and what I actually secretly fear and worry about. You're talking my language in the style that I like. You're far more likely to motivate me to actually take action. So bear in mind, if you're trying to talk to everyone, you're not going to achieve in talking to anyone. So if you're not sure, you really need to spend some time mapping out an ideal audience profile. Who are they? How old are they? What do they like to do? What are their reasons for coming to you? Why wouldn't they come to you? What are their problems, challenges, hopes, fears, dreams? Where do they like to shop? What do they like to buy? What else are they looking at online? The more you can understand, the more you can target them effectively, and the more you can create your content in a really specific way that's going to excite them and make them take action. Okay, tip number 3 is all about telling your story. So once you understand your platform and you understand your audience, then you can create the storytelling element of what you do. It's really important that you have a clear idea of your story. And a lot of not-for-profits come to us and say, oh, but we have 10 different avenues. We have everything from early childhood care to aged care facilities. There is still a core part of your story. There's a reason you started, there's a reason you do what you do, and there is at some point a reason there's synergy over all the different causes and things you impact. There's usually a fundamental story, and whether it's the origin story of how your organization started or it's what drives your organization to keep doing what you do, it's really important you're really clear about that story, because what we want to do on social media is build a lot of trust. Now, we know that 64% of people say that they're more likely to trust a brand if they're interacting positively on social media. So that's a huge amount of trust you're getting just from being there. And then if you can really show people exactly who you are and why you do what you do, then that's going to be incredibly powerful. Now, if you're not really sure how to frame your story in an effective way, I just want to quickly show you on the screen something called the Pixar method of storytelling. Now, there's a particular method that all Pixar stories are based on. And we know Pixar movies, we're talking about things like Toy Story and, phenomenal movies like that have engaged people in their hearts and minds. And they create them in a really simple way. So the frame you see in this screen, everything is once upon a time. So all the stories start with, once upon a time, there was X. Every day, one day, because of that, until finally. So for example, if you were going to tell a story about an organization, once upon a time, there was a woman who had a severe physical disability and she was unable to find a job. Every day she looked for work and kept getting rejected based on her situation, until one day her mother spoke to their local priest at the church and explained the situation and was really upset about what was going on for her daughter. Because of that, the priest then decided to offer a job to the young girl in sorting clothes out that is donated to the church and finding out the best way how they could package or resell or donate or use those clothes. Because of that, it actually started a huge amount of demand. More people started donating clothes, more people came to them for that kind of support. And because of that, an organisation was born that now employs more than 800 people with disabilities around Australia that sorts tons and tons of clothing every single day. And until finally they have a presence all around WA and not only are able to help people in challenging life situations that need a little bit of extra help, but are the largest single employers of disability services in the state. Can you see how that framework works really well in telling the story of your organisation? So now you've got your story, your audience, your platform. It's about talking about how to be social. Now, a common mistake not-for-profits make is they tend to think a lot about their social media, about what they need to get out of it. So we need people coming to our event, we need to promote a program, we need to talk about us. The problem is what you're doing is you're talking to people, and social media isn't like traditional media. It's interactive, it's social, and it's about creating a conversation. So a perfect example that I like to use is the dinner party. So treat social media the same way you would a dinner party situation. So you can find some common ground. Often the first thing we do is when we're in an unfamiliar situation, we might go, how do you know Amy, our host? Great way to create a commonality. You obviously both know Amy because Amy's invited you to her house. So you can start talking about how we went to school together or maybe we work together. Oh, where do you work now? And it flows to a really natural conversation from there. So think about how you can make your social media more engaging. You can ask questions, you can ask for information, you can respond to people when they comment back to you and really start something that's engaging and social. So think about the value for your audience as well as what you need to get out of your channel. Now, the next step is 5, which is planning for the worst. Might sound a little bit depressing because we want to always think the best of people and be really positive, particularly around our social media. But I've seen too many marketing people or social media managers get themselves in a position where somebody says something negative on social media, perhaps a disgruntled former employee starts posting. You know, these things don't happen very often, but they do happen. And the best thing you can do is plan for the different scenarios of what could possibly happen. Because what that means is when something does happen, you, as the person not running your social media, aren't going to panic and have that horrible moment of, I don't know what to do. Because it's really awful. You're going to feel sick. You're going to feel angry. You're going to feel frustrated. You don't want to respond in that emotional state because you might be personally offended about what they said. It's really important you take that emotion and the personal element out of it. And the only way to do that is actually creating things like response management plans. So a response management plan is essentially sitting down with your team and brainstorming anything that could happen on your social media and knowing exactly what you're going to do in what scenario. So map it out into a chart. So for example, you can have, is the interaction positive or negative? If it's positive, great. Is it wrong? Sometimes people can say, I love your organisation and I love how that you've been around for 55 years. And you might go, I love that you love our organisation, but actually we've only been around for 5 years, but I'm glad you feel like we've been around forever. You know, so sometimes you do need to correct people even if it is a positive comment. Then if it's negative, is it a troll, someone who's just attacking you to get a rise and try to create a response? Is it actually inaccurate information you can correct? Or is it actually somebody who's just, putting stuff out there that's irrelevant, that's not that impactful for what you do? And knowing the difference between something that's a bit negative and a crisis is really important to know as well. Sometimes people panic and they just delete it. If you delete negative feedback, it's essentially the same as someone ringing you on the phone and going, hey, I've got an issue, and you just hanging up on them. So you don't want to do that. You want to manage those negativities, particularly the constructive criticism, in a really positive way, acknowledging them, and if you need to, take the conversation off social media, encourage them to give you a call to chat about it more. But once you build a loyal community on social media, the cool thing is they will actually jump in and start defending you, which is a great position to be in because they'll actually be answering that negativity without you even having to get involved in it. And that's what you want to create. Number 6 is about knowing what works. So when it comes to social media, there are lots of different tips and tricks of what works and what doesn't. So for example, I talked before about Snapchat being such a big platform with very limited causes on there. That's a huge opportunity for you. There's also things like, for example, on Facebook, we know that Facebook private groups actually are much higher regarded in the algorithm and the feed than, say, a traditional page. So if you've got, for example, a powerful volunteering group that you want to nurture, it might be worth considering making that into a private Facebook group instead of a page, because it's going to get far more interaction on the news feed, because that's the way Facebook structures their algorithm. One of the other really good things to understand is the type of content you put out there. So essentially there are 3 main forms of content: text, image-based, or video-based. We know statistically an image gets 3 times more engagement than just text, and video gets 3 times more engagement than pictures. So one of the big opportunities for you right now is to create video. And you don't have to have professional, polished, edited video where you've got light boxes and a fancy video camera. Instead, you can do it just with your smartphone really simply. And that's an incredibly powerful thing you can use. So think about the video opportunities. Can you get your CEO doing a Facebook Live talking about their latest announcement? Can you record, your customers or people using your service? Can you share videos that are around competitions or giving advice? There are so many different ways you can do it, but just behind the scenes stuff, even if it's not polished or professionally edited, works extremely well on social. And particularly as causes, people almost don't want you to spend a fortune on professionally slick edited things. They don't relate to that as well as real and raw things, where maybe it's just one of your volunteers talking about what they've done and why they want to be part of your program. So think about how you're going to maximize your opportunities with a few of those simple tricks. So point 7 is more about measuring your results and maximizing your ROI, or return of investment. So what happens is when you're time poor and you're stretched thin and you maybe don't get social media as much as you'd like to, we don't spend a lot of time looking at our results, looking at our analytics, and really measuring the return. Now, the biggest strength of social media versus any other type of marketing is you actually can measure the return on investment. So unlike buying an ad in a newspaper where you know there's 300,000 is the circulation, you have no idea how many of those people actually picked it up that day, how many turned to that particular page in the paper, how many of them actually saw your ad, and then how many people took action from it. You can measure all of that on social. So you should be every month looking at your key data. And by this, I don't mean how many likes you've got, because that can be an arbitrary number. So the Lifeline example I talked about before, they had about 2,000 likes on their page, but their campaign reached 600,000 people in 30 days. So your reach and the number of people you're impacting with your messages is actually much more important than the number of likes you have. So it's important to look at that. It's also important to look at the content you've shared in the last month. Which posts got you the greatest reach, comments, engagement, all of those kind of good things that you have on your channels. So we want to make sure you're looking at that, because then what you can do is you can see which ones worked well. You can work out what was it about them that worked well. Was it the tone, the image, the content, the time of day, how you spoke to people? And you can replicate that so you can keep growing every single month. Because we want to make sure if one month you're here, the next month you're building up, and you keep on growing and getting better and better with the content you're creating. If you're not looking at your results, you're never going to get that constant growth. You're going to pretty much stay the same month after month. And the other thing for you is to be really clear about how you're measuring your return on investment. So if you're investing a certain amount of time and money into social media, you need to know what that's delivering for you. Is it attracting new customers, which is getting you more revenue? Is it attracting donors? Can you measure exactly how many donations you got from social media that month? Is it about attracting volunteers? So that's why it was really important to have that strategy piece so you know exactly what you want to measure. Because ultimately, social media for the sake of getting lots of likes or building out numbers, it's about a vanity thing. Whereas you don't want that. You're a not-for-profit. You want to make sure everything you do is strategic, is actually returning you something really tangible that's going to allow you to keep growing your organization this year and for the next 3 to 5 years to come. So I hope this has given you guys a really good overview of social media and some of the common challenges and issues we see in this not-for-profit space. But if you have any questions around social media, definitely pop over to our website at hancockcreative.com.au. There's a number of extra downloads and things you can use on that website, checklists, cheat sheets, things like that. You can also join our ongoing community. We send out emails once a week with free tips, education. We send out notification of grants, programs, and things you might want to get involved in. Look forward to seeing more from you guys in the future. And if you have any questions around social media, don't hesitate to get in touch with us through the website. We'd love to talk to you about what you're doing and what sort of education and programs might be available to help you develop your social media strategy or develop the knowledge and information in your organization in this space. Thanks so much.